We spent the summer of 2023 on an epic RV trip to Alaska. There are so many decisions to make before even beginning this trek. Which highway do we take? What are the road conditions? What about fuel, cell phone coverage, and the weather? And how much is this going to cost? Join us as we share our tips about how to make your trip to Alaska an unforgettable one. Hey everybody, thanks so much for following along as we took this amazing journey to Alaska last summer. We really appreciate all of your comments and all of your feedback. It was really helpful, more than you know.
Yeah, now we want to share some of our tips for you taking your own trip to the last frontier, especially if you're traveling in an RV.
All right, let's go.
We left on our trip in early June, and that worked out really well for us. You're starting to see some of the summer season, but spring is still kind of there and that bit of that transition period. And then we returned in mid-August. So the big thing that a lot of people want to see when they go to Alaska is obviously the salmon. And that is huge. It's certainly something that we would highly recommend that you do if you can. Now, you do have different times when the salmon run, different species and different rivers, but usually it's going to be late July through August when most of the salmon are going to be running.
Another thing to consider about whenever you go in early June, mid-June, some of your higher mountain passes will still have some snow. A lot of your high altitude hikes may still be snowed in, so that's just something else to consider if you're an avid hiker. Certainly, if you want to see fall colors, you will need to stay later into September to see some of the aspens and the other colors start to change. And another thing is, if you want to see the northern lights, you must stay until it's dark enough to see the northern lights. They are there in the summer. It just never gets dark enough for you to see them.
It's bright at midnight. Well, we obviously drove our RV, a little motorhome, all the way up to Alaska and back. Although we live in Washington State, so we're a lot closer to Alaska than most other people are. Most people traveling to Alaska actually do so probably by cruise. Most of those leave from either Seattle or just across the border in Vancouver, Canada. Another way is obviously just to fly there. And you can fly there, rent a car, and then stay in vacation rentals or hotels. Or you can do what a lot of people do, and that is you fly there and then you rent an RV. We saw a lot of great Alaskan holiday RV rentals everywhere we went in Alaska. That's a pretty popular method of getting there as well. And another option, if you want to take your RV but you're a little concerned about all of the driving and the roads, is you can take a ferry. There are several ferries that go from around the Seattle area and then head up north toward Alaska. We looked into it briefly, but once we saw the price tag, we said it was going to cost thousands of dollars just to take a one-way ferry ride, and that was way more than what we wanted to spend, and we wanted to have the experience of driving anyway, and honestly, I think we enjoyed the drive more than we would with a ferry, but that is an option available to you.
And I think it basically comes down to how long do you have to spend in Alaska. If you have a 2-week vacation, obviously, flying up there, renting a car, and just hitting the highlights is certainly your best bet.
Absolutely.
If you do have time and you can take the whole summer, we absolutely recommend driving it. Whether or not you have an RV, let's learn more about that. There are 2 ways that you can get to Alaska from the lower 48. One is the Stewart-Cassiar Highway that goes along the west side of British Columbia, and the other is the more quintessential Alaska Highway or Alaska-Canada Highway or the Alcan Highway. You'll hear it called many different things. This one starts in Dawson Creek, British Columbia. It has the world-famous Alaska Highway sign, so everybody stops there to take pictures. It's kind of an exciting way to begin the road trip, and there are a lot of beautiful stops along the road. So this highway passes through more towns than the Stewart-Cassiar Highway. You will have more options for fuel, you will have more options for hotels and for food and for bathroom breaks and anything else you might need along the way. There are a lot of stretches of very desolate areas, and you will be driving through a lot of just woods and pretty much nothing except for the mosquitoes. And so it is a wonderful, wonderful highway to take.
So the other option is the Stewart-Cassiar Highway. And just as a quick note, the Stewart-Cassiar actually ends at the Alaska Highway close to Watson Lake. So you're still going to drive a section of the Alaska Highway even if you opt to take the Stewart-Cassiar Highway.
And it is a beautiful section of the Alaska Highway as well. So
it really is. So yeah, the Stewart-Cassiar is definitely more remote. There are fewer services. I really wouldn't probably recommend the Stewart-Cassiar Highway if you're not traveling in an RV.
No.
There are not going to be many places for you to stay, and the ones that are there are going to be pretty rustic.
Yes.
One great thing about the Stewart-Cassiar Highway, though, is you can drive to Hyder, Alaska, one of the most southern towns just in the little tip of Alaska, and that was a really cool experience for us. And the drive through the canyon that is just east of Hyder was one of the highlights of our entire trip. So if you have the option, I would probably say start the Alaska Highway, go up that way, and then on your way back from Alaska, take the Stewart-Cassiar Highway. You're going to have a better chance of seeing salmon at Hyder later on in the summer, which is probably when you're going to be coming back from Alaska.
And with the Alcan Highway, the areas around the road are cleared a whole lot wider, so there is more opportunity to see wildlife simply because if there is a bear on the side of the road, you will see that bear. Whereas on the Cassiar Highway, if
once
he's
it's
there,
10 feet off the road, he's gone.
The trees are so thick, you literally cannot see it. I mean, we did see some bears on that highway, but the second they stepped into the brush, that was it. You were done. So there is, I think, more opportunity to see wildlife on the Alcan. Also, if you are into history, military history at all, the stops along the Alcan that explain how the road was built in the 40s is absolutely fascinating.
If you can only take one road, take the Alaska Highway for sure. If you have a passenger vehicle and you want to travel to Alaska, I would definitely say take the Alaska Highway. There are a lot more services. You're really going to have more options for hotels and vacation rentals, restaurants, gasoline.
Bathrooms! Those are kind of important.
Yeah, especially if you're not carrying your own in an RV.
And that would require more planning because there aren't many hotels along the way, so you will need to make advance reservations to be sure you have a place to sleep at night.
Absolutely.
So contrary to all the stories and tales out there about how horrible the Alcan is to drive or the Cassiar, the roads to Alaska are actually not that bad. You do not need an overland vehicle with, 100 gallons of fresh water and 3 gas tanks in order to make it up there. There are plenty of services.
But we did see a lot of overland RVs, especially from Germany.
Yes.
A lot of folks from Germany actually will ship their rig over to eastern Canada, drive it all the way over to Alaska. We saw a bunch of those.
And they look like tanks coming down the road when they get in the campgrounds. I mean, they literally need like an 8-foot ladder to climb into the driver's seat. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's certainly some places that you can go to with those rigs that we couldn't go to in ours, but it is by no means necessary to have a huge RV like that to be able to do it. You can go in something small. We saw every kind of RV you can think of, and then some in Alaska.
We saw lots of 45-foot Class A motorhome diesel pushers. They were pulling their Jeep, tow vehicles behind them. We saw tons of 40-foot fifth wheels. We saw lots of truck campers. You run the gamut with what you see. Everybody takes everything up there.
In our experience, the drive up from the Spokane area where we started up to Dawson Creek, where the Alaska Highway starts, those roads were phenomenal. Actually better than most roads in the lower 48 in our experience. Those were great. Now, once you actually started the Alaska Highway in Dawson Creek and then you're heading north and west, those were still pretty good. You still are going to have some frost heaves. You're going to have a little bit of rough roads, but overall, not bad at all. We've driven much worse roads, but now there's a famous section of the Alaska Highway that is notoriously bad, and that is from Destruction Bay in Canada, just when you're leaving Kluane National Park, up north through the border, crossing into Alaska for about 50 miles or so. That section is bad.
It is bad. Tons of potholes, lots of gravel sections of the road with a lot of dirt. Yeah, a lot of washboard, and the frost heaves were really bad on this section.
And it makes a lot of sense when you get there. You understand why. That area is just a lot of wetlands.
Yes.
And part of the issue is just below all of that water, you have a lot of permafrost. And above that, in the winter, all the water freezes and expands, and then in the spring and the summer, it thaws out. And it's almost impossible for them to create a road that can tolerate all of those conditions that's not just astronomically expensive.
And they do their best, and they honestly do a good job
do.
considering the terrain they're having to work in.
Yeah.
Do expect some construction in the summer. That's the only season they have to work on these roads. So just pack your patience. And our best advice for traveling either one of these highways into Alaska, slow is pro. I don't care if it doesn't look like the road is bad ahead of you, just be cautious and slow down. I think a lot of what happens to these rigs that you hear all these horror stories about, it's because they were just simply driving too fast. If you hit a pothole when you're doing 40 versus doing 70, it's going to make a big difference.
And in that same note as well, you really want to go slow because you don't want to cause damage to your rig. If you damage something out there, you may be a long way from help, and the help that you may be able to get is probably going to cost you a lot more than it would cost you in most other places in the lower 48 or most of Canada because it's so remote.
And another positive about going slow is that you have more opportunity to see the wildlife because you're not going so fast.
So something you may have heard is that there aren't many gas stations on the Alaska Highway or the Stewart-Cassiar Highway, and that you need these big extended fuel tanks. You need spare gas cans and all that. And we do carry a 5-gallon gas can, at least one with us on our RV trips, but it was not necessary by any means. I think about the longest section that we saw on either highway with no services was maybe 90 miles. Generally speaking, they're going to be fairly close, and if you are paying attention when they tell you that, hey, it's going to be 60 miles, 80 miles, 90 miles, whatever, until the next services, as long as you're paying attention to that, you're fine. Now, be aware, the fuel cost is going to be high, especially in Canada, and especially the farther north you go. It wasn't uncommon at all for us to be paying in US dollars per gallon, somewhere around $5.50 to $6 through the summer of 2023 when we traveled there, and there were a few times we spent even more than that.
Ouch.
Yeah. Now, in Alaska, the fuel prices were generally better. Generally, it was closer to $3.50, $4 a gallon. It's going to be a little spendy,
Buckle
and
up.
that's just part of the trip. Yeah, buckle up.
So obviously, if you don't have young children, this wouldn't really apply to you, but it does to us. We have an 8-year-old daughter, and she is our social butterfly. She loves people, but she especially loves playing with other children. And one thing we really didn't consider before we left was the fact that there probably wouldn't be many children along this route. When you think about people that drive to Alaska, it's typically people that are retired, so it's typically an older age. She got to talk to a lot of people, but not a lot of children. We did see a lot of kids in Denali National Park.
Yep.
There were quite a few families on vacation from all over the country that were there, and we saw quite a few locals actually on the Kenai Peninsula, especially when we were watching the salmon fishing. Local families go out, they have holidays, they go take their kids, and they spend a week on the beach, and they catch their salmon for the year. So she did meet some local kids there. You might want to plan a day at a children's museum or some kind of indoor trampoline park or even just playgrounds. So that's just something to consider if you've got little ones.
So with Alaska as big and a lot of it is so remote, you might be asking yourself, what about cell phone coverage? How do I get internet when I'm traveling in Alaska? And that's a very good question. Basically, what we found was that with our Verizon cell phone coverage, when we were on the Kenai Peninsula, usually we had pretty good cell phone coverage. There are a few places where we had nothing, but generally speaking, that was pretty good. Once you get north of the Kenai Peninsula, pretty much cell phone coverage is mostly limited to the cities. When you get outside of those cities, it's spotty at best, and there were many times we would drive for hours and have no cell phone coverage. So we also have Starlink internet, and that was a game changer for us. There were many, many times we would have had not even 4G coverage. We could not have sent a text message had it not been through Starlink. But through Starlink, not only did we have internet coverage, but we were also able to make phone calls and that kind of thing through Wi-Fi through the Starlink. So that let us connect with the outside world. If you are RVing to Alaska, I would strongly suggest that you take a Starlink system with you. Whether you have to borrow it, whether you have to rent it if you can. If you don't have one, be prepared to be without any sort of communications for a big section of your trip.
And maybe that's what you want. There may be people that just want to unplug for the summer, and
Sure.
If that's your goal, then yeah, just...
Alaska can accommodate that goal, no problem.
Well, you want groceries? Good luck.
It's gonna cost you.
We generally found that big box stores, you know, your Costco's, your Fred Meyer's, your Walmart's in your big cities like Fairbanks and Anchorage and even in Soldotna,
They're reasonable.
they're very, very reasonable. You will find an increase in the price, maybe 10 to 15% on pretty much everything. Produce is by far the most expensive thing to purchase. Produce and dairy, things that are time sensitive. So, you know, they have to ship everything to Alaska. So if something is spoiling quickly, they need to get it up there quickly. And so things are considerably more in the fresh department. Don't think you're gonna eat lots of veggies and lose weight in Alaska if you want to save money.
No, we found ourselves eating a lot of non-perishable
Yes.
food because it was so much less expensive than a lot of fresh produce. And then the other aspect is when you get out of those bigger cities, wow, the sky is the limit for food prices. In Seward, in Valdez, in Kenai, in some of these remote little Canadian towns along the way to get up there, wow, you can spend a fortune on groceries.
We wanted to grill burgers one night and we went to the Safeway and they wanted $8 for a pack of hamburger buns.
Like $1 a piece for a little hamburger
Just
bun.
for the bun. So needless to say, we used sliced bread and we made toast for
Yeah, we do like a
hamburgers.
patty melt and it
Totally
was
good.
great. It was fine. So yeah, if you're traveling through Alaska and you're going to be there for some time, stock up as much as you can on groceries in the bigger cities. Pretty much anywhere else you go, food prices are going to be extremely high. Yes, they are that bad.
They were absolutely, without a doubt, the worst aspect of our whole summer in Alaska.
By far. These little bloodsuckers are everywhere.
And they get into everything. And if there is a crack in your window, they will find it. And if you accidentally leave your vehicle door open, they will find it.
There were a few times when we were in some pretty remote areas that they were literally just swarming us, like 20 or 30 of them trying to land on you at the same time.
And we had a lot of people ask us, well, why didn't you buy the little mosquito nets, you know, that go over your face? Well, that does keep them from swarming around your face and flying into your nostrils and your mouth, but they bite through your clothing. Unless you have super, super thick or waterproof clothing, they will bite. And so unless you're willing to get in the shower pan before you get dressed and literally lather up every inch of your skin before you get dressed.
Every inch. Because if you have literally a square inch that you haven't sprayed, they will find it. They will find it.
And to be fair, even the locals in Alaska told us this year, it was a very cold winter, it was a very wet spring, and it was a very cool spring. So mosquitoes breed where there is water. Even for locals, it was a bad year for mosquitoes.
The rangers at Denali National Park actually told us that the mosquitoes can be so bad in the summer that they can take a pint of blood out of a bull moose every day.
That's a lot of blood when you consider how much those little things can
That's
suck
a
out.
lot of mosquito bites to equal a pint of blood every day. If mosquitoes are something that really bother you and really bothers us, you need to take precaution. Do whatever works for you for mosquitoes and probably then some.
Because they are there and they will come find you.
Oh yes.
We go back into the Yukon. Skeeter just bit me. Ah! Get off! we won't miss the mosquitoes.
So don't go to Alaska thinking that you're going to find a lot of campgrounds up there that are like campgrounds in the lower 48. These campgrounds in Alaska are only operated maybe 6 months out of the year, and some of them maybe only 3 or 4. So expect to be on dirt in a lot of the campgrounds.
Gravel.
Maybe gravel, concrete, asphalt, pretty much not going to happen unless you are in one of the bigger cities. And even then, maybe not.
And you're not going to find amenities like swimming pools and hot tubs and tennis courts.
Nope.
That just doesn't happen there.
No, it doesn't. And reservations, generally speaking, aren't necessary unless you're talking about some of the campgrounds around Denali National Park.
And on the Kenai Peninsula during the salmon run. Absolutely, you need reservations
There
for that.
you do.
Just don't go expecting what you find in the lower 48.
If you want that wild experience in Alaska and you want to be able to save money, boondocking is a great way to be able to achieve both. And we did a lot of boondocking in Alaska, certainly more so than in any other trip we've taken so far. We were gone for 80 nights and we boondocked for 63 of those nights. So boondocking just means you don't have electrical connections or water or sewer. We were able to dump our holding tanks and refill our fresh water every couple of days or so. And we didn't really have to pay very much to be able to do that. Most of the time it was free. So boondocking is a great option. There are lots of places all along the roadsides in both the Yukon and in Alaska and actually in northern British Columbia where you can just pull off the side of the road at a rest stop and you can just stay there for the night. That's very, very common. You'll find lots of people doing that.
And some of the places that you get to boondock are pretty epic. I mean, some of them have amazing views and it's really quiet and secluded. Other times, you know, there are a lot of other people there boondocking with you. Sometimes it's not so glamorous. Sometimes it's just overnighting at a Walmart. Or when we were in Anchorage, we actually overnighted at Cabela's a couple of nights with lots of other people. So it's a very economical way to camp, a way to keep your costs down. You do have to think about water consumption. So that means maybe showers, which Kaylee and I are not huge fans of.
That means turning the water on briefly to get wet, then turning it off while you soap up. And during that meantime, you're going to get a little bit chilly. And Angela doesn't like that.
I don't like that. I like my long hot showers. So it did make the nights that we had full hookups kind of a treat, kind of special.
Traveling is just like business, politics, and dating. The most important thing is money. Not really, but money is obviously a big deal when you're planning a trip as big as one to Alaska is, for sure. We want to give you a bit of a rundown of our expenses. Now, obviously, these are our expenses. Yours may vary tremendously.
And the one thing we did not include in this total were our grocery expenses, and that is simply because we brought a lot of prepackaged groceries from home. We loaded up our RV with as much food as we possibly could bring, so that helped with our grocery expenses. We also only shopped in big cities. We didn't do very much shopping in the smaller towns, and it's such a personal expense. A lot of people may go to the grocery store and be like, I feel like having steak and potatoes tonight, and they just go buy steak and potatoes regardless of the cost. We did not do that. We went to the meat section, we found what meat was on sale, and then we bought ingredients to make whatever dish we can make with that meat. So that is such an individualized thing that we did not include it. We also did not include our dining out expenses. We did not dine out a lot. I think we ate out 2 or 3 times, so we didn't include that here. A lot of people go to Alaska because they want to eat, and they want to eat the seafood, and they want to have the crab and the salmon and the halibut, and if you want to do that, that's fine. Your expenses for dining will be dependent on how you eat.
For our 80-night trip, we spent $70 on propane, so that covered things like our furnace, our refrigerator, cooking, and our water heater. So that wasn't too bad.
And out of those 80 nights, we only spent 17 of those in a developed campground. A few of those were full hookups. Most of them were dry camping. And of course, for the rest of the time, we boondocked. So our total for our campground expenses were just over $500. When planning for a trip to Alaska, what most people are going to think about are the excursions. They're going to think about the plane rides over the mountains. They're going to think about going to see the bears fishing in the waterfalls. They're going to think about going halibut fishing. They're going to think about all these quintessential Alaskan things to do.
And Alaska has a ton of those kinds of experiences, and nearly all of them are extremely expensive. That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do them. There were a few of those that we did, and those that we did, we loved.
Yes.
The one we spent the most on was the Lulu Bell. For the three of us, that was just over $500 for a full day, but it was absolutely a highlight of the trip. One of the highlights of all of our travels anywhere, and it's certainly something that we would highly recommend.
We were definitely working on a budget, so we wanted to keep it within that budget, and most of the things that we did were things that were not very expensive or that were completely free to do. So all in all, we spent just over $1,300 on excursions. Again, that will vary greatly on what you want to see, what you want to do. If you know this is the first and only time you will get to go to Alaska and you really want to see those bears fishing at Brooks Falls, that's something you'll need to plan, you'll need to budget, and certainly if it's worth it, go for it. Just know that the excursion portion of the trip can add up very, very quickly.
When we visited Alaska, we did so in our little 24-foot motorhome, and we absolutely loved it. It was small, but did a great job. And by driving 55 to 60 miles per hour most of the way, we averaged 17 miles per gallon, which for an RV is really good. The total that we spent on fuel driving all the way from Spokane, Washington, all the way to Alaska in the state and back was almost $2,200. By far the single biggest expense of the entire trip.
Well, the grand total of what we spent for summer of 2023 in Alaska, a total of 80 nights, was just over $4,000.
And a lot of people think that if you're going to spend 3 months almost in Alaska, it's going to cost you $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 or more. And if you want to spend that much, no problem. You can certainly spend that or more. But if you want to visit the last frontier, you want to be able to have an awesome time, but you don't want to break the bank, you certainly can do so and not spend a fortune.
And you'll have to be willing to forego some of those excursions and not have full hookups every single night. So you will need to make some sacrifices, but we feel like the sacrifices were worth it in order to be able to have the experiences that we did.
Especially for the amount of money that we spent.
Yes.
Well, we've had a great time sharing our experiences in Alaska with you. Well, we're sure at this point you're ready to move on, and so are we. We've got some big news to share with you in our next video. Very exciting. And then we've got some more travels coming your way as well, and we can't wait to take you along with us on the trip. So be sure to hit that subscribe button if you like our videos. Also, please hit that like button. It really does help us, and we appreciate it very much. And please share your feedback with us. We always appreciate hearing from you.
Thanks again for all of your support. We'll see you guys out there. And until next time, enjoy your journey.